All right, in this question, they're asking us to write the equation of the line that's the perpendicular bisector to the line they've given us. So they've given us the segment TU with points at 1, 5 and 1, -3. We need to find the point slope form of the perpendicular bisector. So we're putting a lot of background information together here. We are going to have to do a few things. We're going to have to use the midpoint formula to find the middle of our line, because remember, a perpendicular bisector has to go right through the center, which would be at the midpoint. So we're going to have to remember our midpoint formula, which I have written here. We also need to know, to write the equation of a line, you have to know the slope of the line you're finding. Well, first we have to know the slope of the line we have now, TU, so we use the slope formula to find the slope of TU. Then we say, well, we don't want that slope, we want one perpendicular to it to get our perpendicular part. Okay, so then we will use the slope we found in step 2 and write down what the slope of a line perpendicular to that would be. Finally, we're going to use the point we found in step 1, the slope we found in step 3, and we're going to write the equation for our line, which is in point slope form is y minus y1, the y from your point, equals m, your slope, times x minus x1. It looks like my parentheses shifted a little bit there. So let's get started. Step 1, we're going to find the midpoint of TU. So we use the midpoint formula, which says add the x's. So the x from this point was 1, the x from this point was 1. So 1 plus 1, and you divide by 2. Then we have a comma here, because remember, our answer is just going to be a point, a number, comma, a number, our x and our y. Now we add the y's for our second coordinate. So if y for this point was 5, plus the y for this point was -3, and we're going to divide that by 2. Let's simplify a little bit. So 1 plus 1 was 2, divide by 2. And 5 plus -3, 5 minus 3 is 2, divide by 2. Here we have 2 over 2 is 1, and 2 over 2 is 1. So the midpoint is 1, 1. That is the middle of the line segment TU. We have our point. To write our equation now, we need to find our slope. So here we go. We need to use our t and our u and find the slope of that line. The slope formula says to take y2 minus y1. That just means you take the y value from your second point and subtract the y value from your first point. So that would give us -3 minus 5. Over, your x is subtracted, so 1 minus 1. That gives us -8 over 0. What's our slope when we get 0 in the bottom of a fraction? Remember, we can't divide by 0. So our slope here, darn it, was undefined. So we're going to have to do a little thinking about what that graph would look like. Okay, what would the graph of this line look like? Well, undefined slope, remember, is a vertical line. It's going to be a vertical line at 1. Okay, we need to use the fact we have undefined slope for our original line. What's the slope of a line perpendicular to a vertical line? What slope would it have? Well, remember, it would be a horizontal. Horizontal line is perpendicular to a vertical line. And this isn't your typical question. Usually we would get a number for our slope and go from there. But here we have to do a little analyzing. So we got a vertical line. The slope, the line perpendicular to that would be horizontal and would have a slope of 0. So undefined slope and a slope of 0, those lines are perpendicular to one another. Okay, next we take that information, put it into the point slope formula to find the equation of our line. And again, the two things we needed were a point. The point we use is the midpoint, so we're going to use the point 1, 1. And the slope of our perpendicular line, which was 0. And m, oddly enough, stands for slope. So we're using the point 1, 1 and a slope of 0. We put it into the point slope form of an equation, which says to just write the letter y minus y1, which is the y from your point. So y minus 1 equals m, the slope was 0, times x minus x1, the x from our point, which was 1. But see, what happens here is if we simplify this, we multiply by 0, we just get y minus 1 equals 0. And that's the simplified form of the equation of our line. All right, here we have a second line. We need to do the same thing for it. And in your assignment, they may give you a picture of the graph, but you don't have to have a picture of the graph to solve this. So it says the line segment LM has endpoints at 6, 0, and -1, 4. Write the equation in point slope form for the perpendicular bisector. So we need to find a line that both bisects or goes through the middle and is perpendicular. Our first step is to find the midpoint of LM because that will be where our bisector goes through, the midpoint or the middle of the line. So we use our formula for midpoint. You add the x's from your points, so 6 and -4. So 6 plus -4 and divide that by 2. Then for the y coordinate, you add the y's from your points, so 0 and 1. 0 plus 1 divided by 2. Simplify that. 6 plus -4 is just 2 over 2. And 0 plus 1 is just 1 over 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And the 1/2, I'm just going to leave that as 1/2. It doesn't divide evenly. Here's the point we'll use down here when we write the equation of our line. We know our line needs to go through the point 1, 1/2, because that is the midpoint of LM. And that would bisect it. Next, we need to find the slope. We're going to start by finding, oops, I forgot to change all these letters. Sorry about that. That's really lame. This should be all for LM. Copy and pasting gets me in trouble. Okay, so now we need to find the slope. Okay, we start by finding the slope of our original line, our line LM. We use the slope formula, which says to do y minus y. So the y from our second point was 1, minus the y from our first point, 0, over, subtract the x's. The x from our second point was -4, minus the x from our first point was 6. 1 minus 0 on top gives me -1. -4 minus 6 on the bottom gives me -10. So the slope of our original line was -1/10. We use that to find the slope of a line perpendicular to it. So remember, perpendicular lines, their slopes have opposite reciprocal slope. This line had negative slope. For ours, we'll have positive slope. That's what opposite means. Reciprocal means you flip the fraction. So 1/10, the reciprocal would be 10 over 1 or just 10. So the slope of our line, our M, is going to be 10. Now let's use that down here to write the equation of the line that is a perpendicular bisector. We took care of the fact that we know it's going to bisect. It goes through the midpoint. And we know it's going to be perpendicular because we fixed the slope that way. So now we just put it into the equation for point slope form. You do y minus y1. So that's just the letter y minus the y from our point was 1/2 equals m. Our slope was 10 times the letter x minus the x from our point was 1. And this would be the point slope form of our line. Y minus 1/2 equals 10 times x minus 1.